Good morning and welcome to Wales, or more specifically Barri Island in Wales. Now this place is fantastic. It's a little seaside resort. You can see it's got a fabulous beach and it's here on the Bristol Channel. We're across from Weston-super-Mare, where I did a video a couple of weeks ago. Now this is the 5th largest town or settlement in Wales, 57,000 people, but I'm really interested in it because until the early 20th century, it didn't really exist. In 1880, this place had about 80 residents. And I'm interested in why this place is called Barri Island, why it's not an island, anymore at least, and also why it almost didn't exist. So I hope you enjoy. We are on the Bristol Channel in Wales. We're looking now towards Weston-super-Mare. And Barri Island is probably actually best known in the UK for a recent sitcom on the BBC called Gavin and Stacey. Now I know nothing about the sitcom. I haven't lived in the UK for a number of years. I haven't seen it, but it was co-written and starred a certain James Corden, who for my American viewers is quite a well-known chat show host. But let's start with why this place is called Barri Island, and for that we need to go back to the 6th century. So we're just going to wander over, actually the other side behind me, over here beyond this housing estate, and have a little look at a church that exists. We're still on the island, but we're in the middle of a fairly modern housing estate now, with some beautiful Edwardian houses here, built in about 1910, 1909. And they demonstrate actually really the origins of the town, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But opposite them, we have this ruined church here, completely innocuous, forgotten by everyone. But this is a 7th or 8th century church called Saint Baruc's church. And Saint Baruc is the reason that the island is named Barri Island. So he was a character who lived in about the 6th century AD, and he was a student of Saint Baruc, and he went with Saint Baruc to an island to study, and he forgot to bring the reading materials for Saint Baruc to do that study. So Saint Baruc sent him back across the Bristol Channel, and unfortunately Saint Baruc died on the journey, and that's all I know about him. He became a saint. Did he become a saint because he died on a journey to get some reading materials for another saint? I don't know, but they created this church over his burial plot, and Barri Island, or Baruc Island as it was at the time, became a place of pilgrimage. It was a highly religious centre. People would come from miles around to pilgrimage and visit this church and the remains of Saint Baruc. And then, after the Norman conquest, there was a Frenchman who was gifted these lands, and he took the name de Barri, with an I, not a Y, an I, as is in Welsh nowadays. Barri is with an I understand it, not with an I. And the name has developed on ever since to describe this place, but it originated with the death and burial here of Saint Baruc. Here we have mini golf called Smugglers Cove here in Barri, and as you can see it's pirate themed, but this actually is a serious side to it, although perhaps most people here don't realise this. If we zip forward from the de Barri family and Saint Baruc to 1786, Barri Island, and it was an island at the time still, was pirate central, and it was smugglers central. There was a smuggler here who had several ships, something like 24 cannon, and he fortified this island and used it as a main base to bring liquor and tobacco in from the continent, and he ruled this area. It was incredibly difficult for the UK customs, as they were at the time, to actually dislodge him, and they had to bring in the military to do so. It took them something like 2 years. He'd basically built a little castle here. He'd fortified it with cannon. He had essentially warships going up and down the channel here, and people lived in complete fear of him. So at that time, certainly no one was coming to Barri Island unless they were involved in the smuggling. And having dislodged him, another guy came in, and they then had to dislodge him as well. And it wasn't until the very early 19th century that you started to get some holidaymakers here, but they weren't holidaymakers like we see now. This wasn't a pleasure beach. This wasn't developing as a Victorian palace at the time. This was heavily forested as an island still, and it was a hunting ground, and you got the elite of Cardiff and the surrounding area coming down here to hunt and enjoy the beach in peace, effectively, in solitude. And because of its proximity to Cardiff, and because of the fantastic beach here, which you can see, there were plans in the Georgian period, 1800, 1810, to develop this island as a grand Victorian holiday resort. It would have been Georgian initially, but then Victorian. There were plans drawn up for wide boulevards, for tree-lined streets with villas on them, a holiday resort for those people who had money in South Wales, but it never materialised. And why not? That's the big question, because people were taking steamers across to Weston-super-Mare from 1876, and there was nothing here. Why was there nothing here? There were 80 people here. It's just madness. And it was down to one individual until about 1860. All the land here, including the island of Barri, and it was still an island in 1860, was owned by the Abbot of Bath. And he then sold that freehold to a family called the Windsor family, who were headed by a gentleman called Lord Windsor, and he was a lord. And this is really a lesson, I suppose, about aristocracy and power in the Victorian era. Lord Windsor had been buying up the coast all the way down from Cardiff to Barri, and he'd been spending an awful lot of money with his family in developing a resort just up the road, now effectively a suburb of Cardiff, called Penarth. And he did not want this beach and this area to develop into a holiday resort. It was for him a commercial disaster if it did so, because he'd spent so much money in Penarth. So he did something unthinkable, even in the Victorian era. He completely closed off the beach and the coastline here, and he basically made it into hunting grounds for him and his friends. But he was more interested in chasing people off. So he had gamekeepers here, supposedly to look after, obviously, the hunting grounds and the game. But what they actually did was chase anyone off who came down here to utilise the beach or enjoy the island itself. And so for 1870 and 1880, there was no development here, none whatsoever. He just didn't allow it because he wanted people to go to Penarth. And it was only in 1896, with the railway coming down here and the establishment of Barri Island Station, that the island began to open up to tourists, because suddenly he could no longer stop people coming here, and B, it stopped being an island, because in order to bring the railway onto the island, they created a causeway. In creating this causeway, there was a bigger plan here, because they could have just continued this Victorian cast iron structure across the waterway here, but they didn't. They physically blocked it off completely, and that not only, as I said, made Barri no longer an island, it connected it permanently with mainland, but it also meant that the water stopped flowing around the island and very quickly silted up. And you can see that here, although the other side of this causeway, very quickly they began to infill and they created land. So if I go under the causeway, obviously now you can see modern houses and so on, but they created docks, they created land which didn't previously exist, and allowed them to expand from this lovely car park as it is now, to create the Barri that we see today. Across the island again to where Saint Baruc was buried, and looking down past the harbour, you can see this, and that is where the channel would have run round and come out the other side of this island. Now, of course, silted up and filled in, and very fertile land, hence used for agriculture. So after Barri's connection to the railway with the establishment of the causeway in 1896, it was no longer an island, and it was highly accessible to people suddenly. And with its fantastic beach and its location to Cardiff, it grew in popularity incredibly quickly, but it grew in a character which other British seaside towns hadn't seen, because they grew up in the Victorian era, whereas this place, as I said, because of Lord Windsor, was completely closed in the Victorian era. What we had here was a town that was established in the early 20th century and benefited as such from a different style of architecture, a different style of town planning. It has this very, very open boulevard on the front. It has these fantastic original early 20th century shops and amusements here. And it grew to become, in the 1930s through to the early 1960s, the third most popular destination in the United Kingdom for holidaymakers. It was astonishing. In 1934, Windsor, 1934, they had 400,000 visitors here at one time. Astonishing. As a result, if you're visiting the UK and you want to see a typical British seaside town with its fish and chips and all of its amusements, this is a perfect place to do it, because it's developed to effectively its 20th century tastes. It's astonishing. Really fantastic. And it was only with the advent of air travel in the 1960s and a desire then to explore the continent, as with all the other British seaside resorts, that it's gone into a decline. And clearly now, although it's busy, and here I am mid-August, You can see it's busy. We don't have 400,000 people here, but that's because only of the weather. If this place was in Greece, if this beach was in Greece, if this scenery was in Greece, it'd be entirely different. But here I am, as I said, it is mid-August. It's warm, it's 21, 22 degrees, but you can see the weather is letting us down. And that's just life, unfortunately, in the UK. Fantastic resort, fantastic geography, fantastic provenance, although restricted initially, as I said, by the aristocracy, Victorian aristocracy, who had their own plans for this place, and now a fantastic holiday resort. So what is there here now? Well, you've obviously got this amazing beach. You've got a multitude of amusements. You've got the pleasure beach in the background with these large rides, and you've got cafes, you've got restaurants, you've got bars, you've got hotels. And if you want to just come down, it's about 2.5 hours from London. It's easy on the train from Cardiff, and just explore a slice of British life in the summer. I would recommend this place probably almost above all others because of its history, because of its more recent development. You won't see Victorian architecture here, you'll see Edwardian and modern architecture here, but what you will see is a slice of British life. You can see we have a fantastic beach here. I'm just going to pan around to show you it, because I don't think you get an impression of just what a good beach and cove this is from the actual town and the pleasure arcades itself. It's amazing. Just astonishing beach, and you can see why people were so desperate to come here and why Lord Windsor, with his alternative destination of Penarth, was so desperate to stop people coming here, because once they came here they were never going to go to his resort. It was industrial, it had major docks, it was a big shipping centre, and it was right in Cardiff. I just want to show my foreign visitors and viewers the British beach hut. You'll find these all over the country along the coastline, particularly the major beaches, and they may look like glorified sheds, and in some ways they are, but some of them are amazing. You either rent them from the council or, in some cases, family owns freeholds, and those freeholds can be incredibly expensive. If you go to the really expensive beaches, for example, Sandbanks and Dorset, you can spend upwards of €500,000 to buy the freehold for one of these beach huts, and they will be done up, particularly the freehold ones, in a style that the owner likes. They'll have a little kitchenette in there perhaps, they'll certainly have a kettle, maybe a microwave, and people come down for the day and just use them and enjoy the environment. The key thing with most beach huts is you're not allowed to stay overnight. They are purely something that you are allowed to use during the day. They're almost always painted, they're almost always single story, and they're just sturdy little sheds which people can enjoy along the seafront of most British resorts. I hope you've enjoyed my little tour of Barri Island. It's been quick, I just wanted to look at the history. We have a town called Barri after a guy who was not called Barry. We have an island which is not an island, and we have a seaside resort which really shouldn't have existed because the owner of the land decided he didn't want it here. But what's happened since is the beach has just called people, and it's fantastic. So if you have a chance, if you want to experience something a little bit different in the UK, I suggest you come down here. You won't regret it. Spend a day, spend a night, enjoy the ambience. There's a certain life here. Thank you.